The known world had a boundary. A young man from the edge of Macedonia decided it did not. Alexander was not yet 20 when he stood before the army. His father had built and announced that Persia would fall. The veterans laughed quietly among themselves. They had seen ambitious boys before. They had buried them. But there was something different in this one's eyes. Not the hunger of a prince who wanted a throne, but the restlessness of a man who could not bear the thought of an ordinary life. So sit back, relax, and watch how a boy proved nothing is truly impossible. Alexander did not fear impossible battles. He feared a life without them. To understand why, we must look not at what Alexander conquered, but at what he believed. From his earliest years, he was raised on stories of Achilles. The Iliad was not merely a book to him. It was a manual for existence. He slept with it beneath his pillow. He carried it on campaign. He annotated its margins in the margins of his own ambition. Achilles had chosen glory and a short life over obscurity and longevity, and Alexander found in that choice a kind of sacred logic. If a man must die, and all men must, then let him die having mattered. Let his name outlive his body. Let his deeds become the measure against which future generations tested their own courage. This was not mere hero worship, it was an operating system for the soul. Philip II, his father, understood power with a cold, calculating brilliance. He had unified Macedonia through diplomacy, bribery, and strategic marriage. He built the military machine that Alexander would inherit. But Philip was a politician. Alexander was something else entirely, a creature of myth who happened to be born into history. Where Philip calculated, Alexander burned. Where Philip compromised, Alexander charged. The father built an army. The son would demand of that army things no reasonable general would ask. When Alexander was 13, Philip hired a philosopher to tutor his son. The philosopher was Aristotle, and the arrangement would shape the mind that would soon reshape the world. Aristotle taught Alexander logic, medicine, ethics, and the natural sciences. He taught him to classify, to analyze, to think systematically. But perhaps more importantly, he taught him that excellence was not an accident. It was a habit. It was the repeated choice to do what was difficult when what was easy was available. Aristotle believed that virtue was the mean between extremes, that the good life required balance and rational self-governance. Alexander absorbed the lessons of discipline and intellectual rigor. Whether he absorbed the lesson of moderation is a different question entirely. The philosopher also gave his student a copy of the Iliad, which Alexander would later call his most precious possession. The connection is worth pausing over. Aristotle, the advocate of measured wisdom, gave his student the epic of unmeasured passion, and Alexander, who would spend his life swinging between the two poles, carried both influences within him, the philosopher's clarity and the hero's fire. At 16, while Philip was away at war, Alexander was left as regent in Macedonia. A Thracian tribe rebelled. He crushed them. He founded a city and named it Alexandropolis. The name was not subtle. Even then, he was practicing for immortality. But the moment that revealed his psychology most clearly came not in battle, but in a field outside Pella, when a horse dealer brought a massive black stallion before the court. The animal was magnificent and utterly unrideable. It reared at every shadow, through every groom, and seemed to embody chaos itself. Philip dismissed it. Alexander, then about 12 years old, made a wager he would tame the horse or pay its price himself. He noticed what the adults had missed. The horse was not vicious. It was terrified of its own shadow. Alexander turned the horse toward the sun so that it could no longer see what frightened it, and mounted. The court fell silent. Then Philip wept, not from pride, though pride was there, but from the sudden, terrible recognition that his son was destined for a scale of existence that would dwarf his own achievements. He told Alexander to seek a kingdom worthy of himself, for Macedonia was too small for him. The horse was named Bucephalus, and Alexander would ride him across 2 continents and into legend. But the psychological lesson of that day runs deeper than a boy's horsemanship. Alexander possessed an unusual capacity to see through surface chaos to underlying patterns. He did not fight the horse's fear. He removed the cause of the fear. This would become his method in warfare, in diplomacy, and in leadership. Identify the root, not the symptom. solve the problem at its source. It is a habit of mind that separates those who manage crises from those who prevent them. When Philip was assassinated in Sambite Sancherluke, BC, Alexander was 20 years old. Most young men who inherit power at that age are consumed by it. They indulge, they hesitate, they are manipulated by older advisors who understand the machinery of state better than they do. Alexander did none of these things. Within 2 years, he had secured Macedonia, crushed a Greek rebellion, and crossed into Asia with an army of 40,000 men. He moved with a speed that bewildered his enemies and exhausted his own soldiers. Speed, for Alexander, was not merely a military tactic. It was a psychological weapon. He understood that most opponents make decisions based on what they expect to happen. If you move faster than expectation, you create a kind of mental paralysis. The enemy is still planning for a war that has already begun. At the Granicus River, he faced a Persian army that outnumbered his own and held the high ground. His advisors counseled caution. Alexander attacked immediately, leading the cavalry charge himself. He was always at the front, always the first into the river, the first up the bank, the first into the enemy line. This was not recklessness, though it looked like recklessness. It was a calculated psychological transaction. A leader who shares the greatest risk earns the greatest trust. Alexander's soldiers did not follow him because they were ordered to. They followed him because they had watched him place his own body where he asked them to place theirs. Trust, in the end, is not built through speeches. It is built through shared vulnerability. At Gaugamela, he faced Darius III with odds that would have made a cautious general retreat. But Alexander understood something about Darius that Darius did not understand about himself. The Persian king commanded from behind. He was surrounded by luxury, by courtiers, by the apparatus of divine kingship. Alexander commanded from the spear point. He was surrounded by dust, by death, by the immediate reality of combat. One man was fighting a battle. The other was managing an image. The outcome was never truly in doubt. After Gaugamela, Alexander was effectively master of the Persian Empire. He was 25 years old, and here we encounter the central psychological paradox of his life. The man who had burned with such focused intensity to reach this moment seemed, in some ways, to become more dangerous after achieving it. Unlimited power does not merely corrupt, it disorients. It removes the external constraints that force a person to develop internal ones. Alexander had spent his life pushing against limits, geographical, military, social. When the limits fell away, he discovered that the only remaining boundary was within himself, and that boundary, he would find, was far more difficult to breach than any city wall. He continued east, into Central Asia, into India, driven by a momentum that his own men could no longer understand. They had signed on to conquer Persia. They had not signed on to march through the Hindu Kush, to fight elephants, to chase a king into the edges of the known world. At the Hyphasis River, they refused to go further. Alexander sulked in his tent for 3 days, a gesture that reveals more about his psychology than any battle plan. He could not accept that his will had found its limit in the will of others. For a man who had defined himself through conquest, the word enough was not merely unwelcome, it was unintelligible. He turned back, but the return would prove as brutal as the advance. He led his army through the Gedrosian desert, where thousands died of thirst and heat. The historical sources suggest that Alexander may have chosen this route partly to outdo earlier expeditions, to prove that his men could survive what others could not. If so, it represents one of the darkest applications of his psychology, the willingness to sacrifice human life not for strategic necessity, but for the abstract principle of The desert crossing remains one of the most controversial decisions of his career. Some historians see it as a logistical failure. Others see it as a psychological wound inflicted by a man who could not tolerate the idea that his campaign had been stopped by mere soldiers. Yet the same psychology that drove men into deserts also produced moments of extraordinary human connection. During the Gedrosian March, a soldier brought Alexander a helmet filled with precious water. The army was dying of thirst. Alexander took the helmet, looked at the men around him, and poured the water onto the sand. If there was not enough for all, there would be none for one. The gesture was theatrical, certainly. It was also, in a profound sense, authentic. Alexander's entire leadership was built on the principle of shared hardship. He did not ask his men to endure what he would not endure himself. He did not accept privileges he could not extend to others. In a world where kings were gods, Alexander insisted on being a soldier. It was this refusal of special treatment that made his men love him even when they did not understand him. The encounter with Diogenes the Cynic occurred earlier, during Alexander's time in Corinth, but it illuminates the same tension. The philosopher was sunning himself when the young conqueror approached with his entourage. Alexander asked if there was any favor he could do for him. Diogenes, without rising, replied, "Stand out of my sunlight." The courtiers were scandalized. Alexander was not. He walked away and remarked, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." The line is often quoted as evidence of Alexander's humility, but the psychology is more complex. Alexander recognized in Diogenes a freedom he himself would never possess, the freedom from ambition, from the need to prove, from the relentless internal pressure to become more than he was. Diogenes had nothing, wanted nothing, and therefore feared nothing. But Alexander had everything, wanted everything, and therefore feared the one thing he could not conquer, the end of wanting. His admiration was real, but so was his inability to choose the philosopher's path. He was Alexander, really, and being Alexander meant continuing to become Alexander forever. In India, during the Malayan campaign, Alexander led an assault on a fortified city and, in his characteristic fashion, scaled the wall before his soldiers could catch up. He was inside the city, virtually alone, when an arrow struck him in the chest. He collapsed, bleeding, and his army, believing him dead, massacred the population in their grief and rage. Alexander survived, but the wound was severe, and the psychological wound may have been deeper. For the first time, his own impulsivity had nearly killed him, not through the enemy's skill, but through his own refusal to wait. He had always been faster than his men, braver than his generals, more willing to risk than anyone around him. The arrow proved that there was a point where courage became its own kind of blindness. As the years passed, Alexander's psychology underwent a transformation that even he may not have fully understood. The boy who had slept with the Iliad beneath his pillow became a man who demanded proskynesis, the Persian ritual of prostration before the king. His Macedonian officers refused. They were free men, not subjects. The confrontation revealed a growing gap between Alexander's self-conception and the reality of his relationships. He had always led by shared sacrifice. Now he seemed to be demanding worship. The change was gradual, but it was real. Power, especially unlimited power, does not merely change what a person can do. It changes what a person believes they deserve. Alcohol became an increasingly prominent feature of his court. Macedonian drinking culture was robust, but Alexander's consumption grew heavier as the pressures grew greater. The death of his closest friend, Hephaestion, shattered him. They had been companions since boyhood, lovers by most historical accounts, partners in every campaign. When Hephaestion died of fever, Alexander's grief was not merely emotional, it was existential. Hephaestion was the mirror in which Alexander saw himself reflected. Without that mirror, the reflection itself became unstable. Alexander ordered the doctor crucified. He cut his own hair in mourning. He lay on Hephaestion's body for a day and a night. The ancient sources describe a man unmade by loss, and for the first time, we see in Alexander something beyond the conqueror's mask, a human being who loved, who grieved, who could not bear the thought that even his power could not keep death from those he cherished. The death of Clitus the Black revealed the same psychology from a darker angle. Clitus had saved Alexander's life at the Granicus River. Years later, at a drunken banquet in Samarkand, Clitus challenged Alexander's growing pretensions to divinity and his adoption of Persian customs. The argument escalated. Alexander, enraged, threw an apple at Clitus's head and then ran him through with a spear. The ancient sources differ on whether the killing was premeditated or a moment of drunken rage. What is clear is that Alexander's immediate reaction was not triumph but horror. He withdrew to his tent and refused food for 3 days. He wept. He called himself a murderer. The episode reveals a man whose temper could override his judgment, whose pride could transform into violence in an instant, and who possessed enough self-awareness to recognize the monstrosity of what he had done, but perhaps not enough self-control to prevent it from happening again. This is the psychology of extraordinary achievement at its most complex. Alexander possessed virtues that most leaders lack: courage that was not performative, discipline that was not compulsive, loyalty that was not transactional. But these virtues existed alongside flaws that grew more dangerous as his power grew more absolute. His anger, once a tactical weapon, became a liability. His ambition, once a focused flame, became a consuming fire. His need for glory, which had driven him to heights no other human had reached, also drove him to demand recognition that no human should need. At Opus, near the end of his life, Alexander faced a mutiny not from his Macedonian veterans, but from their hearts. They were exhausted. They were homesick. They had followed him across the world, and now they wanted to go home. Alexander called an assembly. He stood before them and spoke, not as a god, not as a tyrant, but as a soldier who had shared every hardship they had endured. He reminded them of their shared victories. He reminded them that he had slept on the ground while they slept on the ground, that he had eaten the same rations, that he had been wounded in the same battles. I have no part of my body, he told them, that is free from wounds. There is no weapon used in close combat, no missile used in long-range combat that has not been used against me. He listed his scars. He named the battles. He spoke of his father Philip, who had found them wandering and helpless and had made them masters of the world. And then he offered a choice. If they wished to leave, they could leave, but they should remember who they had been before him and who they had become with him. The speech was a masterwork of psychological leadership. Alexander did not threaten, he did not bribe, he appealed to identity. He reminded his soldiers that they were not merely mercenaries or subjects. They were participants in a story larger than themselves. The mutiny dissolved. The veterans wept. They asked to stay. The speech at Opus remains one of the most effective addresses in military history, not because of its eloquence, though it was eloquent, but because of its psychological accuracy. Alexander understood that what his men needed was not more gold or more rest. They needed to believe that their sacrifices had meaning. They needed to remember who they were. But the speech also reveals something about Alexander himself. He was, in that moment, doing what he had always done, using his extraordinary ability to inspire others to sustained a project that had long since passed the point of rational return. The psychology of the speech is the psychology of the man, the belief that will could overcome any obstacle, that narrative could reshape reality, that the story of greatness could be more powerful than the facts of exhaustion. In his final days, Alexander fell ill in Babylon. The sources disagree on the cause: malaria, typhoid, poisoning, or the cumulative damage of wounds and alcohol. He was 32 years old. As he lay dying, his generals asked him to whom he left his empire. To the strongest, he reportedly replied, or perhaps he said, to the best. The ambiguity is fitting. Alexander had spent his life proving that he was both. He had never named a successor because he had never truly believed he would need one. The psychology of immortality does not include plans for death. His body was placed in a golden coffin and eventually interred in Alexandria, the city that bore his name and would outlive his empire by millennia. His generals divided his conquests among themselves. The empire he had built in 13 years dissolved in a generation. But the idea he had embodied, the idea that a single human will could reshape the boundaries of the possible, endured. What, then, can we say about the psychology of Alexander the Great? He was a man who conquered kingdoms, cities, and armies, but who struggled to conquer the parts of his own nature that unlimited power exposed. He was a student of Aristotle who chose the path of Achilles. He was a leader who inspired absolute loyalty through shared sacrifice, and a king who eventually demanded worship. He was a man who poured water onto desert sand to show his soldiers that he would not accept privilege they could not share, and a man who led those same soldiers into deserts where thousands died to satisfy his need to outdo every predecessor. He was a philosopher who admired the freedom of wanting nothing, and a warrior who could not stop wanting everything. The lesson is not that Alexander was a contradiction. The lesson is that he was a human being who operated at a scale of intensity that made his contradictions larger than life. His virtues were extraordinary. His flaws were catastrophic. His ambition was both his genius and his prison. He conquered the known world because he could not bear the thought of being ordinary. He died at 32 because he could not bear the thought of stopping. And in the space between those two truths lies the psychology of Ak, a man who changed the shape of history, not because he was divine, not because he was destined, but because he decided every single day that the limits others accepted were limits he would not. Alexander the Great remains one of history's most compelling figures, not because he was perfect, but because he was perfectly, terribly human, magnified by power, distorted by ambition, capable of both transcendent courage and devastating cruelty, and forever chasing a glory that he believed would make him immortal. He was wrong about immortality, of course. No one lives forever. But he was right about something more important. We do not remember those who accepted the world as it was. We remember those who refused to. And in that refusal, whatever its costs, Alexander the Great built a legacy that has outlasted every empire he conquered. He became, in the end, what he always wanted to be, a story that would never end.